It's Monday the 9th of July. Welcome to our afternoon edition of Arirang News. It's good to have you with us. I'm Kwon Jang-ho. Despite marathon talks over 2 days, it seems US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo left North Korea with little to show for his efforts. Pompeo said progress towards North Korea's denuclearization had been made, but the regime's state media said otherwise. It described the US demeanor in the talks as regretful and gangster-like, and rang counter to the spirit of the Singapore summit. There had been high hopes, at least, that the remains of US soldiers from the Korean War would be returned during this visit as well, but that did not take place either. On top of that, Kim Jong-un did not make time to meet with Pompeo, unlike last time. Is this a step back in North Korea-US relations, or a bump in the road that had to be expected in long and difficult negotiations? We'll take a more in-depth look with a guest in the studio later, but first we head over to the NEWSCENTER for that latest news updates with Devin Whiting. Devin?
Hi, Jang-ho. South Korean President Moon Jae-in has kicked off his 4-day trip to India with a visit to the world's largest Hindu temple as a show of respect for the culture and people of India. But dominating his agenda for the rest of his state visit will be the economy. Our chief Blue House correspondent Moon Gan-young is traveling with the president, and she files this report from New Delhi.
With a population of 1.3 billion and growing, and an economy expanding at the fastest pace in the world, India has been identified as a new frontier for South Korea for strategic and business interests. Now, with that in mind, South Korean President Moon Jae-in has kicked off his 4-day state tour of the South Asian country with a visit to the largest Hindu temple in the world. Welcomed with garlands, a tikka and kalwa, or holy thread on the wrist, President Moon and First Lady Kim Jong-un admire the architecture and appreciate the culture and religion of the Indian people. Then, South Korea's first couple performed the abhishek by offering holy water. Deeper understanding of each other's culture and strengthening people-to-people exchange. It's the first P of what South Korea has identified as the main bilateral agenda with India, the 3P+, people, prosperity, peace, and more. On the way out, the president leaves written in the visitor's book, "I pray for peace for Korea, India, and the world here at the Akshardham temple where deities reside." But it's a second P, prosperity or economic ties, that's the primary focus of Mr. Moon's first visit to India as president. The South Korean president is traveling with a huge delegation of business leaders, and dominating the agenda on day 2 will be a South Korea-India business forum, which will likely open a new avenue for bilateral partnerships, and a visit to Samsung's new smartphone factory, said to be the world's largest, for ribbon-cutting ceremony. Samsung has invested over $710 million in the project, which adds capacity to the company's Noida plant, which makes smartphones, refrigerators, and flat-panel televisions. Guiding the president around the new plant and briefing the president will be Samsung Electronics Vice Chairman Lee Jae-yong. The first encounter between President Moon and the leader of the nation's biggest conglomerate. President Moon's first full day in India is fully dedicated to expanding the economic ties with the world's second most populous nation that's fast becoming the most dynamic consumer market. Now, the president's economic aides say this reflects the importance of India, the last great untapped opportunity for export-driven South Korea, as it seeks to cut reliance on its 2 biggest trade partners. Traveling with the South Korean president, Moon Gan-young, Arirang News, New Delhi.
Meanwhile, the Times of India has published an interview with President Moon in which he said South Korea and India need to build closer ties to ensure a better future for both countries. He called India a key partner in his new southern policy, praising the talents of its people and noting the potential of its immense market. Cha Sang-mi reports.
Seoul's top office shared President Moon Jae-in's written interview with an Indian daily newspaper just before the president left for his 4-day state visit to the South Asian country. In his interview with the Times of India, President Moon referred to India as a key partner for his new southern policy that encompasses cooperation in infrastructure, defense, science, and the economy, as he hailed the nation as the most populous democracy in the world. President Moon wrote that, quote, he highly values cooperation with South Asian countries And that's why he sent special envoys to India and ASEAN for the first time last year. Building future partnership for people, prosperity, and peace is the vision for the new Southern policy. As for South Korea-India economic cooperation, President Moon said the fields are boundless, but expressed his wish to see more collaboration with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's initiatives for Make in India, Smart India, and Digital India. This will be in the manufacturing, infrastructure, and high-tech industries. The South Korean leader also mentioned the hundreds of Korean companies doing business in India, including Samsung, LG, and Hyundai Motor Company, and added that startups and small and medium-sized companies are also eyeing the vast Indian market. He added that bilateral trade and investment should continue as the two sides keep upgrading the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, or CEPA, a free trade agreement between Seoul and New Delhi. When asked about South Korean government's direction to achieve peace on the Korean peninsula in the wake of the two inter-Korean summits and the Pyongyang-Washington summit, President Moon vowed to follow through on the decisions made in those landmark meetings, as he quoted India's venerable figure, Mahatma Gandhi, saying there is no path to peace, peace is the path. President Moon also called on India to work together towards a lasting peace on the Korean peninsula that will be passed on to the South Asian region. Cha Sang-mi, Arirang News.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is now in Vietnam on the third leg of a round-the-world trip, and he said in Hanoi that North Korea should follow Vietnam's example, open up, build a relationship with the U.S., and prosper. Some experts and American media, meanwhile, are saying Pompeo's latest visit to the North was a disappointment. Lee Ji-won has more.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said he hopes the United States could one day share the same level of partnership with North Korea as it does with Vietnam, despite Hanoi's ideological differences and past conflicts with the U.S. Speaking to business executives in the Vietnamese capital Hanoi on Sunday, Pompeo emphasized how Vietnam's new engagement with the U.S. was key to its rapid growth over the past few decades, and that this too could be North Korea's future.
In light of the once unimaginable prosperity and partnership we have with Vietnam today, I have a message for Chairman Kim Jong-un. President Trump believes your country can replicate this path. It's yours if you'll seize the moment. The miracle can be yours. It can be your miracle in North Korea as well.
This comes just days after Secretary Pompeo held the first follow-up talks with North Korean officials after the summit between the leaders of the two sides in Singapore last month. While Pompeo said that there was progress in almost every aspect of their discussions, many experts are skeptical of this. They say that there hasn't been much significant progress made in the talks, considering how Pompeo sought to set agreements on final, fully verified denuclearization and verification with the North.
There were no specific agreements made on the goals Pompeo had set for his third trip to the North. Furthermore, North Korea's attitude towards the U.S. also suggests that the talks had a disappointing outcome. Pompeo had met with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in his two previous visits, but not this time.
In fact, though Pompeo said that he had not anticipated meeting with Kim Jong-un, in the joint press briefing with his South Korean and Japanese counterparts on Sunday, ABC News' Tara Palmieri, who traveled with Pompeo, tweeted that White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders said Pompeo will be meeting with the leader and his team. But other experts still found some reasons for optimism in the outcome of the talks. They said that although North Korea did criticize the United States' unilateral demands for denuclearization, its good faith in President Trump shows how they still hope to continue the talks. Lee Ji-won, Arirang News.
The two Koreas will be holding reunions next month for families from both sides separated by the Korean War. And on Monday, renovation work began at the facility in North Korea where the reunions will be held. According to South Korea's Unification Ministry, a 22-member team crossed the border this morning and headed to the Mount Kumgang Resort, where the reunions will be held from August 20th to the 26th. After a 3-day on-site inspection of the facility last month, it was determined that the resort needed some work done. Officials say the repairs are expected to last until mid-August. I'm Devin Whiting, and those are your news headlines for this hour.
Over 2 days, US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo met with officials in Pyongyang to try and implement the deal reached by their leaders in Singapore, most notably to begin the process of denuclearization. But it seems the two sides viewed how the meeting went very differently. Kim Jong-un reports.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo wrapped up his 2-day trip to Pyongyang after a second round of talks Saturday evening with Kim Jong-chol, the vice chairman of the North Korea's Workers' Party Central Committee. Soon after the discussions, Secretary Pompeo said that they were mostly productive.
We had many hours of productive conversations. These are complicated issues, but we made progress on almost all of the central issues. Some places a great deal of progress, other places there's still more work to be done.
Pompeo said the two sides agreed to hold discussions on July 12 on the repatriation of the remains of Americans killed in the Korean War. And he said they also discussed modalities, as he put it, for the destruction of a missile testing facility in the north. However, his North Korean counterparts apparently came out of the meeting with a different view. The North state-run Central News Agency reported, citing an unnamed foreign ministry official, that the United States was seeking Pyongyang's denuclearization in a way that was unilateral and forced. The official expressed disappointment over the outcome of the talks, claiming that Washington did not meet Pyongyang's expectations of productive measures conducive to building trust in line with the spirit of the North U.S. summit. During his latest visit, Pompeo was not able to meet with Kim Jong-un, but instead, he and his North Korean counterpart did exchange letters written by their country's leaders to each other. Regarding the visit, South Korea's presidential office of Cheongwade said that it was the first step on the journey to denuclearization, adding that the South Korean government will work closely with the U.S. and North Korea to achieve complete denuclearization and peace on the Korean peninsula. American media, however, have reported on the outcome of the talks as unsatisfactory, with the Washington Post saying that the KCNA's report evidently contradicts Pompeo's comments that a breakthrough was made. The New York Times also reported that Pompeo's third visit to Pyongyang was the least productive so far. Kim Mo-gyun, Arirang News.
Now, joining us in the studio today, we have with us Dr. Bongyoung Seok from the Yonsei Institute for North Korean Studies. It's great to have you back with us today.
Pleased to be here again.
So, Pompeo went and came back from Pyongyang, and we sat here last week and we discussed a few things, but perhaps we didn't think it would go quite as badly as we expected. We expected some things to come out, but it seems like Pompeo got very little out of it. What is your assessment of Pompeo's visit to Pyongyang?
Well, Secretary Pompeo would not agree with your assessment. He said that he had many hours of productive conversation with his North Korean partners, and denuclearization itself is a very complex issue. And he said he was very proud of his negotiation team. But I'm inclined to agree with you that the talk failed to produce any breakthroughs. Maybe that was not intended the purpose or the original goal of Pompeo's team, because this is as they themselves describe, a first step toward a long journey, which is the complete denuclearization. He described the conversation and negotiation as constructive and made in good faith. That means that they must have clashed on many of the key issues because of huge differences. That's why Secretary Pompeo described many hours of the negotiations constructive and in good faith. Means that they at least try to hold on to minimum level of mutual trust that they were negotiating in order to pursue mutual benefits. But we have to wait and see. It seems like the United States negotiation teams were very clear about the scope and terms of their demands. In the trilateral press conference with his counterpart, Foreign Ministers of South Korea and Japan, Secretary Pompeo emphasized that the North Korean negotiation teams, including Mr. Kim Jong-chol, did not push back when they explained to the North Korean government officials about what complete denuclearization and the U.S. demands meant. And North Korean team, according to Secretary Pompeo, did not challenge that denuclearization, of course, would require thorough inspection and verification. So we have to wait and see how much detailed outcomes have been accomplished during his trip. And there will be another trip or meeting between North Korean government official and Secretary Pompeo.
But then what do you make of North Korean state media's comments after Pompeo left Pyongyang? They said the meeting was regretful and the US were gangster-like. That's quite aggressive language, considering Pompeo said it was made in good faith.
Well, it was made in good faith and constructive in terms of United States, negotiation team did not shy away from very clearly and specifically explain to the North Korean team what would constitute the minimal requirements for North Korea to receive the benefits as a quid pro quo of United States making concessions. So it must be very disappointing to North Korean government, but it was substantial progress in terms of the United States government patching up some holes left after the summit meeting in Singapore between Chairman Kim Jong-un and President Trump. So if devil is in details, then this meeting was very beneficial to the Trump administration in terms of tightening the screws to deliver very clear message what those details actually are.
In the North Korean state media report, it specifically talks about establishing a peace regime on the Korean Peninsula, and that was what was reached at the Singapore summit. Does that suggest that North Korea wants declaration to end the Korean War first before they take steps towards denuclearization?
According to the content of that statement, North Korean government seems to prefer that. But there's some strange tweets in that statement because North Korea was not really sanguine about declaring the end of the Korean War without clear presence of China. Although Kim Jong-un agreed with South Korean President Moon Jae-in at the Panmunjom Summit meeting on April 27 that it is a common goal of both Koreas to declare the end of the Korean War by the end of this year, and it remains as the ultimate goal for both governments. But China was the main variable here because Chinese government made it really clear to three governments, US, North Korea, and South Korea, that without China's presence in that process, China will not endorse any changes with regard to the current situation based upon 1953 Armistice Agreement, arguing that China has lost 190,000 lives and 360,000 Chinese voluntary armies got seriously injured. So China has a legitimate right to get invited to this process to declare the end of the Korean War and move toward the replacement of the 1953 Armistice Agreement with more sustainable peace agreement. So there was a new position of the Xi Jinping government since April this year. Previously, it was the United States prodding China to assume more direct responsibility. President Trump himself initially urged Xi Jinping government to take charge because North Korea is an issue that China must be responsible for. And China was backing off that nuclear North Korea is the issue that the United States must assume responsibility for. But after the summit meeting between Kim and Trump was announced, the Chinese government made a 180-degree change and said that China, quote, is a directly relevant party of the Korean Peninsular issues. That was the statement issued by the Foreign Ministry of China in April. And even the Chinese newspapers ran an editorial with a comment on the idea of US and two Koreas declaring the end of the Korean War, an idea that is particularly laughable. So it is not so much about North Korea, but China that has been opposing this idea of declaring the end of the war. So rather than North Korean government protesting to Washington that you do not make any progress with regard to the declaration of the end of the Korean War, but North Korean government has to make a same protest toward Beijing for the delay.
So you agree with Senator Lindsey Graham in the US that China is perhaps pulling the strings behind North Korea's attitude at the moment?
Well, China's fingerprints are here and there. One, like the statement that China should not be dismissed in this progress to replace the armistice agreement with, or declaring the end of the Korean War with a more sustainable peace treaty. Two, China had already declared in the immediate aftermath of the US DPRK summit meeting in Singapore on June 12th, in the form of a press briefing by the spokesperson of the foreign ministry, that there is regulations and agreements in the UN Security Council resolutions on North Korea that if situations will change, then the members of the United Nations Security Council would make important changes with regard to the applications of the existing economic sanctions on North Korea. Basically, China was alluding to North Korea that we are behind because we hold the trump card when it comes to changing the degree of the economic sanctions on North Korea. So it is up to China whether China will remain in economic sanctions on North Korea until North Korean government is going to make important step forward toward the denuclearization, or China is going to dilute the pressure of economic sanctions for the sake of protecting North Korea.
Pompeo, after he left Pyongyang, came to Tokyo, and then he went to Vietnam on Sunday, where speaking at a business forum, he called on North Korea to look at an example of Vietnam as an example of how cooperation with the US has ended up in prosperity for the nation. He said he told them to tell North Korea to, quote, seize the moment, and that the miracle could also be theirs. The US seems to be dangling this economic prosperity carrot, if you may, in front of North Korea. Is that what North Korea wants? Will Kim Jong-un bite?
Is that what North Korea wants? Yes, but at the right price to pay. Pompeo and President Trump have delivered the same message to Pyongyang over and over again. Secretary Pompeo once compared North Korea to South Korea, that if North Korea agree on denuclearization, then North Korea will be the next South Korea, the shining example of economic prosperity. And Secretary Pompeo also reminded North Korean government officials that United States supported the Marshall Plan in Europe, the reconstruction of post-war Europe. And Pompeo now compare Vietnam to the future of North Korea. So you're right. United States government has been busy reminding Kim Jong-un and North Korean government officials that there is a huge carrot, not just carrot, but all kinds of vegetables that North Koreans covet if North Korea is going to take important steps toward the denuclearization. But unfortunately, North Korean government has not made that bold strategic decision. So that's the positive message, dangling the carrots of economic prosperity, but negative message to the same effect has been reiterated by 3 foreign ministers in the joint press conference on the 7th, right, in Tokyo, that they all repeat the same message, that unless North Korea denuclearizes, economic sanctions remain in place. Foreign Minister of Japan Kono, Secretary of State of the U.S. Mike Pompeo, and Madam Kang Kyung-hwa, Foreign Minister of South Korea, all made the same statement. Unless North Korea moves, the economic sanctions will remain in place. So it is up to North Korea.
Isn't there a risk at the moment, though? North Korea's reaction was quite aggressive. Just shortly before we go, isn't there a risk that North Korea ends up pushing back too hard? For example, Trump last time, he threatened to just walk out of the summit. Isn't there a risk that he's North Korea playing with fire a little bit? An unpredictable nature of the Trump administration?
Right. Definitely, North Korea is playing a dangerous game, playing with fire, and it's we have to wait and see how Trump administration will respond, because Trump administration will not be outsmarted by North Korea when it comes to playing with fire or playing the game of uncertainty. So who knows? There might be a surge of tension on the Korean Peninsula, at least in the short term.
Fascinating. Thank you for coming in today, as usual, and sharing your insights with us.
You're welcome.
That brings us to the end of our show, but do stay tuned to Arirang for our later newscasts. to bring you all the latest updates from Korea and the rest of the world. Thank you for watching and hope you join us again soon. Goodbye.